All right, let's get started. Everybody, come on. Settle down. So let's look at the agenda where we are. We had we were just working on Angular, right? We're in the 6th week, and I believe last time we met on Tuesday, we introduced AngularJS routing, right? That allowed us to implement route mechanisms for navigating through our application, through our single page application. And I believe we were about to start on a demo, right? We were going to do some live coding. Okay. Let's see where we left off. Let's see, where were we? We were in routing, and we had just started with the index page, right? Let's go over this where we were back on Tuesday. We had created a couple of a container, right? We had created a movie app, declared that, and probably even implemented an app.js. There it is, right? Movie app implemented there, and declaring the dependency on the Angular routing module, which we loaded, right? And this is the Angular routing module we loaded. So we're saying that our module depends on this other module, right? Once it depends on it, we can then use a lot of the functionality that is declared in that module. So yes, we declare app. We then created a configuration file, which is this one right here, that allowed us to configure the navigation of the application, right? It allowed us to use the route provider to map the hash paths, right? Map them to physical files to load dynamically, right? To do that, in index we declared links in a navigation at the top, and then we declared an ng view at the bottom, and this is where the home and the search page are going to be loaded dynamically as we navigate from one link to the other. Yes? Right? And the configuration, it says, configures what you see. Oh. Actually, I believe I need to share my screen. Right, so the configuration file is kind of like our traffic cop, right? Our dispatcher that says, if you see this in the URL or some pattern off of that, we're going to dynamically load the home. Or if you see search, you will dynamically display the search. We also declare controllers for each one of these, right? We said that this view is going to be controlled by this home controller, and in this other view, the search view, is going to be controlled by the search controller. And they're implemented under the same directory as the views are declared, right? The controllers live right. They're siblings to the view that they control. The home controller probably is not doing much. It's not doing much, right? It's not doing anything, right? The search controller, it's currently it's not doing much, but eventually it's going to do quite a lot, right? It's going to presumably listen in for incoming titles of movie titles, and it's going to go off and search these titles through the OMDB API. Right. So let's look at the view. Presumably, the view declares an input field where we can type the title of the movie, and if they click on a button, it tells the controller that they've clicked on this button. It passes this title to that function, where presumably we're going to be contacting OMDB for that movie, for that particular title. Is that where we left off? I think everybody remembers where we were on Tuesday. Let me run it for you. It's under experiments, routing, and routing. Yeah, so experiments, routing, right? So let's go to experiments, routing. It is where we left off, right? And we have home here, and we click on search. We go and we can navigate. And these 2 pages are injected dynamically. We can even see that in the HTTP in the network request. We can see that, you know, if we reload this, we clear this out. If we click on search, notice that the request. Oh, sorry. If I click on home, notice that Angular made an AJAX call back to the server, right, under the covers, asking for this HTML page. See that? Right? And that HTML page is just a snippet of code. Right? It's only a partial piece of text, right? It's just h1 home, which Angular, right, parses it out. It creates a DOM object, and then it appends it to ngView, right, to that div. And same thing if I navigate to search, right? It was already loaded, so it doesn't load it again, right? It caches it. And again, if I navigate to search, it clears out the content of ngView and it replaces it with the content of search. So you have this dynamic showing of content, whereas the navigation, notice that the navigation is not part of that content, right? It's not part of that content. It's outside of the ngView, right? So here's in the outer index page. The index page is our container. It contains the entire page. It has the placeholder, the ngView placeholder, where home and all the various content are going to be loaded dynamically. But the things that are common, notice that they live outside of the ngView, like the navigation, right? Lives outside, right? Because it's shared across all pages. Make sense? Right? So it makes no sense to have them in each one of the pages. All right. So notice that our navigation. Let's improve a little bit on our navigation. It's somewhat lame right now. Let's replace it with a Bootstrap tab, right? So if we click on a tab, we can go one or the other. So we can look at how these can be highlighted when you are in one or the other. Okay, so let's do that. Let's go components and navs, and we'll copy this example nav bar, and we'll replace this. I'm going to replace that, and I'm just going to remove some of this stuff. And we're going to have the URL for this will be /home, like we had earlier, right? And the hyperlink for this will be /search, right? And this will be search. And we don't need this last one. There we go. So we have kind of like tabs, yes? We have tabs there, but they don't really do anything. I mean, they do allow you to navigate between the two. They're basically hyperlinks, but notice that they're not highlighted correctly, yes? And we talked about last Tuesday, we talked about on ways that we could fix that, right? Let me add an additional break. Have some space above it. There we go. I might even have, maybe instead, maybe I might have a common, you know, movie application at the top, right? And then we have the tabs underneath, right? So what we said that the way we could fix that on the highlighting this is that we can dynamically select things to be active, right? These hyperlinks to be active as we click through the application. So to do that, let's create a controller that can give us the location object, right? That we can then use to highlight, to activate these tabs programmatically. So to do that, we're gonna assign a controller to this, or maybe let's create an outer nav tag, right? And in here, let's declare a controller for this. We'll call it the nav controller, right? And we will implement that in a script source navigation, and in there we'll put navigation dot controller dot. If I could spell today. So let's implement this navigation controller, which we don't have, and we're going to call on it right here by name. Yes. So let's create that navigation controller under here, and we'll say new directory. It'll be navigation. So actually, this is under views, right? So views / navigation, and in there we'll create a file. Navigation controller.js. So in here, we're going to create a controller that the only thing that's going to do is provide the location object back to the view. Right. So let's do that. So it'll be Angular .module movie app, and then declare a controller. Call it, what was it, nav controller? And we'll implement it in a function of the same name. And the only thing that's going to do is that it's going to take the location object, it's going to feed it into the scope object. We'll say scope.location is going to be equal to location. So now what I've done is that I've made the location object service, right? I've made it available in the view, right? So the view can now see the object, right? So now that the view can see it, it can use it in the template. It can display it, right? We can display maybe down here. There it is. I'm just going to display it like that, right? If we reload this. Okay, it says it's an object. Well, it looks like it's an object. Yes. That object has some methods in there. It has a method called URL, which tells you the current URL. Anything after that hash. You see the hash? It says hash/home. See that? Right, it tells us where we are logically, right? Not physically, but logically. Right, if I click on search, notice that it changes as well. Yes. So we can use this information to highlight the tabs, right? We can use it in this location, this URL, to highlight the tab, to show things, to highlight, to hide other things. You can do all sorts of logic, right? And based on the location, right? Based on the state of the application, which is encoded in the URL, we could strategically show things and hide other things, or highlight things. So let's use here, instead of hard coding active here in this LI, let's programmatically highlight it. Right, and only highlight it if we are in the home path. Yes? So we're going to say, okay, for ng class, I want to use the active class, but only if location URL is equal to /home. Okay? And do the same search LI. And use the active class, apply the active class only if you are in the search URL. Yes? So yeah, it uses the routing mechanism. The routing mechanism is a little bit limited. For instance, it doesn't allow you to do nested views. Okay, and so there are alternatives to this default routing. For instance, UI routing is a much more powerful implementation, but it's not part of the core Angular library. Angular 2 implements a lot of the same features that UI router implements, like nested views. You can encode the URL to be search friendly, so you can use your own naming conventions for the URL. So a lot of the features of this alternative UI router are incorporated in the next version, not version 1. Yeah. And I'm going to have to redesign the course once version 2 comes out. So yeah, so here's a, if I click on home, it's not highlighting. Why is it not highlighting? URL, active, ng class. Did I miss something? Location URL is /search active. I didn't misspell that, right? Oh, I forgot to close something here. There we go. Right, notice that it highlights depending where I am. Notice that this highlight has nothing to do with the content of the page, right? It used to be in the previous implementation, it was the content of the page that hard-coded the highlight of the tab, right? Over here, we are using the encoding in the URL to determine what should be highlighted, what should be shown, what should be displayed. Okay, so we don't need this anymore. We're going to remove that, right? Okay, so let's go back to the search view. In the search view, we have this title that we're going to send to the controller. The controller has it now, right? In the search controller, there it is. We have the title. So if we type a name for the movie title, we can I think we display it in the console, don't we? Yeah, we display in the console. So if we have in the console, we have here avatar. We say search. Notice that it goes in the console. So we do have it. We have the title of the movie. Yes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go off to OMDB and fetch the movie data. Yes? Let's do that. All right, so to do that, we're going to introduce a new service that is dedicated to interacting with the HTTP protocol. Right? And the service is called $HTTP. Okay? Just like scope, the scope object is responsible for interacting with the DOM. Yes? The HTTP service is used for interacting with HTTP. Right? So they have very specific things that they can do. One of the things that it can do is use AJAX to make calls, make get, posts, puts, deletes, anything that you can generate in a HTTP request. Right? So to generate a get request, right, we use the get function of the HTTP service. Right? This is very similar to what we did in AJAX, right, with jQuery a couple of weeks ago. Right? The API is a little different, right? But basically, it takes as arguments the URL where you want to send the GET request, right? And I don't remember what the GET requests look like, so let's go to OMDB API. Right, I think it was this. This is the URL, right? It's the URL. And then in the query, you would use several query parameters to fine-tune your query, right? S would be for the a search on using titles, right? Using the title of the movie or TV show that you're looking for. You say S equal, and then we can append the title that is passed in as an argument. This is going to generate an AJAX call, right? Just like we did in jQuery. And like we did with jQuery, it's going to, when the response comes back, right, it's going to notify us at a function that we're going to provide it. Okay? So to do that in using the HTTP service, we use the .success function on the HTTP object, and we can pass it a function such as render. Okay. So, and that function lives here, render. And render is going to receive the response from the remote API. Right now, we're just going to do a console log response to see what comes back. We're okay? Right. So let's refresh this. And if we type here avatar, right, and we do a search, indeed we get a request, a response from the server, right? It's the same object that we were getting back then when we were using jQuery, correct? Right? And we get the how many there are, the search results, right? There's total 49, and we can iterate over this, right? So what do we do with this object when we did it, when we were using jQuery? What do we do with this response? Yes.
We have to parse it with raw DOM objects, like create TDs in the jQuery.
Right. So we need a table to do that, right? So let's create that table. Right, we need a table that we're going to dynamically fill in those rows, right? Those rows from the objects as we iterate over the objects, correct? Right. So here's a table. Let's create the head. Let's create the first row, and in here we're going to have we're going to put maybe the poster, then put the title of the movie, and let's have the IMDb. Oops. IMDb ID. Okay, in there, and then in the body, here's where we're going to generate the dynamic rows. Yes, dynamic rows. So in here, right, if we were using jQuery, we would grab that T-body, we would go into a for loop and iterate over those objects, correct? And generate a TR for each one of those rows, for each one of the objects, and then a TD for each one of those columns, correct? Remember that? It was, I don't know, like a dozen lines of code, maybe 20 lines of code. Here, the only thing we need to do is just pass the data to the front end. That's all we need to do. Right? There's nothing to do in JavaScript. Right? We just pass the data to the front end. The front end is the one who's responsible for rendering the DOM, not the JavaScript. Okay? Right? What we have to provide here is a template of what we want to generate. Right? We want to generate a table row, and we want to copy and paste this row, right, for each movie in data.search. Remember, the response has a search array. Yes? Right? If we look at the response, notice that in the response, the object that comes back has a response, has a search array, and it has a total result. You see that? Right? And what we're doing is that we're sending the response to a data object in the front end. And there it is, the data object. We're going to retrieve the array that has 10 elements, and we're going to iterate over it. So there's a movie in each one of those elements in that array. Yes? And for each one of those movies, we're going to copy and paste this row, right? This table row. And for columns, we're going to display a movie poster. We're going to display movie title, and we're going to display movie IMDb. Wait, let me see if I'm spelling this correctly. We have the poster, capital P, title, capital T, and IMDb, lowercase I. So this is capital T and IMDb ID. See that? All right, let's go back to our front end. Let's move this to the right, maybe. And let's try this again. Let's reload. Let's say avatar, search. We got data on the front end. Let's see, what do we got? We got a very long URL for the image. We got the title, and we got the IMDb. You see that? Right? We didn't have to generate the table row by hand like we did with jQuery. Right? Instead, we never left the comfort of the HTML. Right? We generated the HTML in a HTML editor, as opposed to when we generated the HTML in a JavaScript editor, right? Which was very error prone. As opposed to here, we stay in the same, HTML friendly environment. So the poster is a That's not really what we want, right? So instead, we want an image for this, right? So let's do instead an image, and we'll say that the source is that movie.poster for the image, right? So let's reload this and see what we got. Let's clear that. So let's refresh. Notice that I refreshed and I got an error. See that error? What's it saying? It says you're trying to load an image whose name is, curly bracket, movie.poster, close curly bracket, close curly bracket. See that? And that's exactly what this IMG tag is trying to do, right? Images by default, when they get parsed by the browser, the first thing they're gonna try and do is retrieve that image, right? And it doesn't find it because it's a bogus image. See that? It's not a real image. It's a placeholder for an image. Yes? Right. So we need to tell the browser not to try and load this image because I don't have the image yet. It's only a template, right? I don't have the image yet. So instead of source, I'm going to use ng source, meaning I don't have the src attribute yet. Right? I will know the src attribute a little later. I will let you know. I will dynamically generate the src attribute once I have a value for the poster. Yes? Okay, so now if I reload, it doesn't complain, right? Because the image tag doesn't have a source attribute, so it's not going to try and load anything. Right? It's only a template. So now we have avatar, and we search the movie, and we have what we would expect. Okay. Notice we have the avatar and the IMDb. Let's change this a little bit, and let's set the height to be 100 pixels. And this avatar. I'm getting tired of having to type avatar all the time. All right, so what did we do last week? What we did last week in the search page, in the input field, we typed value equal, and then we hard-coded the value that we want to search on. So I'm going to type in and hard-code avatar. Okay. Now I refresh, and the value is not there, even though I hard-coded it. What's going on? Well, the reason it doesn't work is that this input field has this low-level value in the HTML, but then it has this higher-level variable from where it's supposed to grab the value, right? From the controller. It goes to the controller and says, control, do you have a value for the title variable? At first, so it's blank, so it overrides whatever value I might have added by hand. Yes? Right? So the way to override this really is to, in the scope of the controller, to hardcode a value, initial value for that title. Right, so that when I reload, I have now a value for avatar. See that? That's from the model, not from the HTML. Make sense? Everybody okay? Okay, so now if I search, excuse me, I clicked on that and I get avatar, right? So what I would like to be able to do, oh, there's some images that are not available. Okay, so if I okay, all right, so it works. I'm going to go with something that has value, always has values. Okay, so what we'd like to be able to do is once we search for this, I like to be able to click on maybe the title of the movie and navigate to a details page. Yes, right. Notice that this is somewhat what you're asked to do in your project, right? Create some kind of search page. Yes. Now this search page goes out against a remote API, right? In your project, that's using a remote API is optional. Right? So you don't necessarily have to go out to a remote API. You would go maybe to your own APIs, right? In your databases, in your local Node.js server. Here we're going out to a remote API and retrieving data from there. Okay, but this is what I mean in your project, that you need some kind of search page. Yes? Right? And now we're going to implement a details page that if I click on the title, I like to be able to navigate to a details page, right? And I'll provide as an argument the ID of that particular movie that I want to see. Yes? All right, so let's do that. Let's go back to the view, and from the title, let's create a hyperlink out of this. Here, let's create a hyperlink. It says a href. I want to navigate to a details page, and I'm going to provide as argument the ID of the movie, the IMDb ID of the movie. Okay, make sense? And the title is the same title. Okay, all right. So now if I reload, now notice that now all my titles are hyperlinks, right? If I hover and I click it, right? Notice if I click it, I am in the search page. Yes, I'm in the search page. If I click on it, I go to the home page. What happened? Well, what happened is that I am using a hash, right? A path, a URL that is not configured, right? And in my configuration file, it says that I only know about /home/search. I don't know anything about a /details. Okay. Since I don't know about that URL pattern, I am going to go to the default location /home. Yes? Right, so for this to work, I need to create a URL pattern for that new path. Right, I need a details. But let's look at what the pattern is. The pattern is actually not just details. It's details followed by something. Yes? And that something is not always the same thing. Right? It's something that changes over time depending on which one you click. Right? So we need a placeholder to be able to grab onto this value. Right? So to do that, we'll do details / and then we're going to create here a placeholder. Notice the colon. We say, I'm going to grab that IMDb. I'm going to put it in a variable called ID. Right? You can call it whatever you want as long as you know what you mean, what it means to you. Right? I like to, so I don't, you know, so that I keep everything straight in my head. I like to keep all these variables the same name, right? So that I know that this is that and the other is the same across everywhere in controllers, and in the HTML. So, okay, all right. And I'm going to implement the details page in the directory details, and it'll be a details controller. Details controller. Yes? Pretty good? All right, so let's implement the details view and the controller. Let's create a directory for details. And in here, we'll create a HTML and say, call it details.view.html. And it's a partial. So this is h2 details. Okay. And what I'd like to be able to do is render the value of that IMDb variable that is in the URL. Yes? Okay. So I'll call it the IMDb ID. Right. And I'm going to have a controller. Now, this IMDb ID variable that the view is declaring, right, is not directly mapped to whatever's in the URL. Okay. The controller is responsible for doing this. Remember, it's always a controller responsible for providing the data to the controller, to the view. Yes? Right? So the view doesn't magically, you know, hook up to anything other than whatever the controller provides it. So it is the controller's responsibility for accessing this IMDb and then providing it to the view. Right? So let's create that controller. So this is details.control.js. So in here, we'll create that controller. We'll say Angular dot dot module. So it's the movie app, and we're going to create a controller called, what do I call it? Details controller, right? And I'm going to implement it in a function called the same way. It's going to take the scope, right? And okay, so the controller is the one who's going to provide the IMDb ID. Right? Where's it going to get it from? Well, to get it from the URL, it needs a mechanism to do that. So the config route provider is the one responsible for mapping these URLs, right? Map them to a physical, these virtual URLs, yes? These paths, map them to physical URLs, right? And load the right content. Well, it's also responsible for parsing out these variables and creating a map of all the parameters, right, that it retrieves from the path. Yes? Okay. So to do that, it makes available that map of parameter variables. It makes them available in an object called route params. And so route params is a map of all variables that have been parsed out from the URL. Okay. One of the attributes in that map is the IMDb ID, because that's what configuration. Right, it's going to parse that out. It's going to bind it and make it available in the map by name, the name that you chose here. Okay. So there it is. So that's where the value is, and we're going to send it to the view using the scope. And we're going to use the same IMDb ID variable that the view declares. Yes? We're okay? All right, so if we refresh this, and we go to search, and we click on Star Wars, and we click on this, we navigate to the details, and we don't have the value for IMDb. Why not? We never declared details controller, right? I mean, we declared it, but we never loaded it in the index page. So let's go and load it in the index page. Script, that's our C, views. What is it? Details. And then, why is it not finding it? Details. Control.js. Did I actually put it there in the correct place? Is that where it is? Views, details, details controller, right? That's weird. That my autocomplete was not finding it. Reload this. Still not happy. Details controller, undefined. Details. Did I misspell it? Config details controller. Then it's details controller. Let me paste that here. And the function is here. Scope route params. And the index. Did I not write this correctly? Let me type this again. Let me see. Script, src, views, details, details controller. Okay, load that. Okay, it worked. Right, I must have mistyped something. There it is. So there's the ID. You see that? That's the ID for the latest Star Wars, I believe. Oh, A New Hope, right? If I click on this, you'll get some other ID. So now that I have the ID, I should be able to go back to the API with this ID and retrieve the details information about this particular movie, right? So let's do that. Right, so let's go here in the details controller and use the same HTTP service we used earlier to retrieve that information. So we're going to say, now that I have the IMDb, I'm going to say http.get. We need the URL. What's the URL? It's this. That's the URL. I'm going to paste it in here. And I believe if you have the IMDb, you can use the query parameter I equal, and then you can provide the ID as an argument. Yes? Valid right there, right? And once the callback comes back, right, when the response comes back successfully, we're going to send it to a function called render. And we know how easy, how trivial a render is going to be, right? Right. I'm just going to say our function, our render function is going to receive the response. It's going to send it to the UI through a object called movie, whatever we want to call it, response. So now in the view, right, we can render movie. All right, so it's going to be the object that comes back as a response. Yes? Right? Let's see. Refresh. There it is. There's the object. See that? That's the object coming back with the title, the year, the ratings, right? The writer, the actors. Okay? Right? Once we have this JSON here, we can start having the UI, lay out this information where we want it. Okay? Let's see the poster. Let's do the poster. And we have the title somewhere. There's the title. So instead of details, we could do movie.title. There it is. So in the title, now we have the name of the movie. For an image, we can put the IMG here. And we can say that the source is going to be movie.poster. Right? And we're going to have a width or height of 100 pixels. Right, so let's do that. There it is. There's the image. There's the image. Next to the image, let's put in a paragraph, let's put the plot. So we'll say movie dot plot. So there's the image and the plot, right? Let's make the image float left. We can make it float left. We can say class pull left. Right? And then everything else is just going to wrap around that image. Okay. Then let's see. We can also provide the list of actors. Yes. The list of actors, if you remember, was in a string. There it is, right there. Actors is a string that is comma separated. Okay. It's comma separated, so we can split it by comma and convert it into an array, and then iterate over that array. Yes. Right. Remember we did that in jQuery. All right. So let's do something similar here. We want it in a UL, or first of all, let's create here an H3 actors, right? And here we have UL. We have a line item. We want one line item for every actor in that array of actors. Yes. But first we have to create the array. Right. Right now we only just have the string. Right. So let's do that. We're gonna repeat. We're gonna repeat this line item for every name in where? Well, we have movie.actor. What's that? That's a string, right? But the string we want to convert it into an array of strings, right? So we can split that, right, around the comma. So this whole thing is now an array of strings, and we're going to iterate over that, right? And so name is going to be bound to each string in that array, right? And we're just going to then display just the name right here. Make sense? So if we refresh, we have now the actors and the names. Okay. I mean, notice how much simpler this was to build, as opposed to when we did it with jQuery, right? jQuery still has a place, right? But definitely not generating dynamic DOM elements. Yes.
So we have cones already. It's kind of take a step back, but I was kind of, I'm not sure I completely understand how the Angular and Node are working together. The Angular and Express and Node because they're kind of both receiving requests.
And so we're not using Node at all.
Okay, we're not using Node at all.
No.
Okay,
Well, I'm sorry. We're using Node to host our static pages. That's all.
okay, I see.
Node is only giving us our JavaScript, our CSS, our HTML,
So
right? And it's not doing any other thing. I'm sorry?
So when you make a request from your, I mean, you have an href or something in your HTML
Yes.
that is, you know, in the midst of your Angular stuff.
Yep.
That makes a request. What is that an endpoint that the node is responding to?
You mean just a minute. So, for instance, these hyperlinks. You mean? Where are they? No, not that one. We control. Yeah, these hyperlinks maybe. These over here.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, if that's something that node responds to.
Oh well, notice that it has hash at the end, right?
It has a hash meaning.
So that means only the browser is going to listen to this, right? Only the browser is going to listen to this. So the browser uses the hash to not navigate away from the page, but to jump in a different section in the page, right?
Okay. So
Right.
could you just explain one more time what that hash actually means?
Yeah. Yep. So let's spin. Okay, so so there's a mechanism in browsers that has been around for a while, right? That allows us to do things like this, right? If you have a really long page, I think we covered this on Tuesday. Did I? Right? And so Wikipedia is a perfect example, right? Where you have a very long page and you can split it up into various sections, right? And then you can identify each section using an anchor A, right? You can say name, right? References, right? Not a hyperlink, but an anchor, right? You can declare each portion, right? Same thing, right? Giving it different names, right? And then at the table of content here, right? You can create real hyperlinks whose href, right, is equal to hash, and then the names that you have. So ref, and then you have your ref.
Hash is more like a relative hash, more like a hash.
It's a relative path within the same page without never leaving the page.
It's more of a pattern than a path, as opposed to like the-
Yeah, so it goes after the URL. So if you have, HTTP /, and then index page, right? It comes. So this is the physical URL, right? And then after this, you can have several things. You can have a query string, and then you can have a hash, right? And these are they have different names, right? This is the query, right? And this is the hash, right? And browsers can listen and generate this, right? Browsers can generate this using a form, right? When you submit a form, the browser generates this, right? And browsers can also listen for changes in the hash. And the default behavior that browsers do is that they listen for changes in the hash, and the default behavior is to look for this name, right, in the page. Yes, right, and then it just scrolls down to here, right, to whatever position. Then you have something similar that allows you to go all the way to the top, right? So what Angular and many of these model view controller libraries do is they take advantage of this behavior that has been around for quite a while, right? And they hijack it and says, no, I'm going to take this for myself, right? And what they do is that they establish a listener and says, hey, browser, notify me in JavaScript, right? Notify me when the hash changes, right? Notify me when the hash changes, and I will do certain things. What will I do? Well, if it's home, I'm going to do an AJAX call and fetch data and load it dynamically. If it's profile, I'll go and fetch data and loaded dynamically, the page never leaves. The page never reloads, yes? Right, we never leave this page, the index page, right? We stay always in the same page. As far as the browser is concerned, you never went anywhere, right? You stayed in the same page, navigated to a different section of the page, yes? Right, so these frameworks hijack this behavior, right? And take it to their own advantage, right? And they create their own navigation mechanism within there. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, so the server never sees any of these requests, right? The server is never notified of any of these requests. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Now notice that we can go back. We can go back, and what would be your expectation here? Right? Your expectation would be that you would see what you had earlier, right? The original search you just did originally. That would be your expectation, right? If I go forward, what would be your expectation? I just came from where? From details, right? And there was the details of a particular movie. Your expectation would be that that would be there, right? That movie. If I go forward, notice that it is true, right? So what happens here is that there's a couple important things here. One of them is that the browser, changes in the hash participate in the history of the browser. Okay, so the browser, just like you navigate from one page to the next and you go backwards and forwards, right? And it remembers the history. Changes in the hash are also remembered. Right? So if you go back, well, you go back to the hash that you had originally, which was /search. Yes? And if I go forward, is where I just left, right? Which was /details/ the ID here. See that? Okay. Now notice that this one seems to remember that the search had this particular movie, right? But this one doesn't remember that we had done a Star Wars search. See that? Why does one work for one but not the other? Okay. Well, here it works because the URL has enough information for the page to reconstitute the state of the page. Okay. We say in general, we say that URLs should contain enough information to reconstitute the page, the state that uniquely identifies this particular state of the application. Yes? I should be able to copy this URL, send it to someone, and they click on that URL and see exactly what I see. Right? That's what you would expect. Right? But these are dynamic pages, yes? In dynamic pages, it's a little bit different. Right? We use the encoding of the information that we have in the URL. Right? There should be enough information in that encoding that I should be able to reconstitute that page. Right? Imagine Amazon, right? You visit a product at Amazon, and there's lots and lots of information there. That's a very dynamic page. Not only do you have the product information, you have lots of reviews, you have images of other products that other people have bought, right? All this data is dynamic. They have been from lots and lots of database queries, right? And it was built dynamically for you, yes? But if you copy that URL and send it to someone, and they click on that URL, they will see exactly what you saw, right? So the URL has enough information, right, to reconstitute the page, even though that page is dynamic. So that's the same that we have here. I mean, it's a trivial example, but nonetheless allows us to talk about this topic. Okay, the URL should always have information. So what happens here if I go up here and I see Star Wars? Because the URL doesn't have the information that it needs to reconstitute this page. Nowhere in the URL says that I came from searching about Star Wars. You see that? So there's a problem with this page. This page is kind of like overloaded. It's being used for two purposes. One, for the no search state. Right? I haven't searched anything, and I render something based on not having searched anything. That's one state. The other state is that I have indeed searched for something, right? I type Star Wars and I click on this, right? And this is a separate state, right? This is a separate state, the same page, but a different state, right? I do have, and I need to be able to represent and distinguish between them. I need to be able to distinguish between these two states of the same page. One of them is search and no argument. That makes sense, right? When I come from home and I go back to search, right? I haven't searched yet. That's a legitimate state. But when I have searched, the URL should encode something here, like you have searched for Star Wars, right? And be able to reconstitute the page. Make sense? All right, so let's do that. Let's implement that. Because the expectation is that if I navigate away and then come back, I should be able to see exactly where I was. Right? It would be jarring for me to go forwards and then backs, and I don't see the same thing. Right? It breaks the model that I have about the internet, about the web, right? And this history, right? So I have to play nice with this, right? So to do this, let's go back and rework the search controller. So the search controller is going to use the location service to be able to work with this URL. Okay, the location service is used for reading or manipulating this URL. Okay, we used it where? We used it in the navigation, right? We used it in the navigation, the location service, to ask it what is the current URL. Yes? Right? We are going to use it now. We're going to use it now to not read from it. We're going to be able. We want to be able to set it. Right? If you search, I want to be able to set the URL to be /Star Wars, so that I now uniquely represent the current state of this page. Yes? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the location. We use the location, and we're going to set the URL to be search / and then the title, so that we encode in the URL the fact that we searched Star Wars or whatever it is, right? What's that going to do? What's that going to do? Well, this is going to generate a path which currently is not configured in the routing, right? You see that? The routing is not going to know what to do with that URL. Okay, it has home, it has search, it has details with something afterwards, but it doesn't have search with something afterwards. See that? So we're going to have to come back here and encode that somehow, right? Right. What we're going to do is that we're going to take this exactly, right? It's going to say either search with nothing afterwards, or search with something afterwards, like the title. Right? They both go to the same page. They're both handled by the same controller. Yes? Right? Okay. All right, so let's do that. So let's refresh. Right? So I searched. Okay, so what happens is that I updated the URL, and that updating of the URL changed the URL over here. It encoded it actually. You notice that it changed my space to %20, and basically invoked the invocation of the same view where I was, the same controller. I need to be able to grab the title from the URL, and we can do that from using the route params like we did earlier, right? So we can say route params. And it's where? It's the title, right? We called it title. So I'm going to grab the title from the route parameters. I'm going to say var the title from the route parameters. Oops. Route parameters. I'm going to grab title. Okay. And if there is a title, if title. Then we're going to call search with that title. Okay. I think. Where should I do this? Should I do it here? I guess so, right? Title. I think that's right. Refresh. Oh, there it is. It actually worked, right? I just refreshed the page and noticed that Star Wars was already in the hyperlink, right? It was already there and it worked. If I encode this and say start track, right? It says search. I notice that it searches the URL. Yes, right? Yes. I'm sorry. Oh, there. Actually, I don't need this anymore, right? I only put it there because I was lazy and I didn't want to have to type it all the time. So stat track, right? And avatar search, and it searches it. I notice that if I go to the details, it shows me details of that movie. And if I go back, right, notice that avatar was encoded in the URL, right? It gets retrieved from the history of the browser, and it invokes the search back to the client from the third-party API, right? Obviously, there's a lot of optimization that could be done here, right? For instance, instead of going directly to the third-party API, I could cache these results, right? If I already have the results for avatar, right, I could save myself a query to the server, right, if I already have it in the cache, right? So I could first check the cache to see if I have results for avatar and give that to the client for rendering to the controller, right? If not, then I would go and fetch the actual data and update my cache. Make sense? Right? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So notice that in both cases, right, in the details page and in the search page, notice that we're making direct access to the third-party API, right? We're using the $HTTP to do the query. Yes. This is in general considered to be bad practice. Okay, that the controller is accessing and manipulating the data directly. Okay, I believe we talked about this in one of the examples that we talked about on Tuesday, right? That you know, especially if you have controllers that are manipulating the same type of data, right? I believe the example that we showed you on Tuesday was manipulating a collection of users, right? One of the controllers was listing all the users, whereas the other controller was listing the details of a particular user. Remember that? Okay. Anyway, the good practice here is that whenever we're accessing a data source, okay, whether it's from our own database or from a remote database, we should not have it here in the controller. We should have a dedicated, centralized, modularized piece of code that is whose responsibility is to talk to this data service. Okay, this is a very common design pattern in backend, you know, in server-side development, right? That if you're creating code that interacts with the database, right? You encapsulate the data access into a data access object, right? And in there, you encapsulate all the queries, right? All the selects, the inserts, the updates, the deletes, right? So instead of having SQL all over your code, right? You encapsulate that in one single class or set of classes that is responsible for talking to the database. Yes? And then they provide a nice API, right, to the outside world, a public API that allows them to talk to the database, right, through functions. So it gives them a nice higher level interface to talk to the database without having to know the specific SQL that you need to do. Make sense? Right. So we're going to do the same thing here. This use of URLs and $HTTP is the equivalent SQL in your code. Yes, it's the equivalent. We want to encapsulate that in a single place where that is responsible for talking to the data source. So we're going to replace this. We're going to copy this, and we're going to put it in a separate JavaScript. Right, we're going to put it in another directory called services. Services. Okay, so services. We're going to put there all the JavaScripts that we need to talk to the various data sources. In this case, we only have one data source. right, which is our movie API. But starting next week and continuing as we introduce Express and MongoDB, we're going to have different data sources, at least two. One of them is going to be our third-party API, if you want. No, it's optional. And the other data source is going to be our own database. Okay? So at least you're going to have two services. So let's create the service to talk to the OMDB API. So we'll call it the OMDB service.js. Okay. All right, so in here, we're going to encapsulate all data access to OMDB. Right? Now, typically, you would put here all the CRUD operations. Right? Notice that right now, we're using just two operations on OMDB, right? One of them is search by title, and the other one is search by ID, right? They're two, meaning give me a collection or give me one, the details of one. Yes, those are the only two, and they're both read operations, right? They don't allow us to, for instance, do write operations, right? We can't post data, right? We can't delete data. We can't update data. We can only read, right? But in general, services encapsulate all the CRUD operations: creation, deletion, updates, deletes, reads. All the reads would live here. Right now, it's a little simple. We only have two read operations. That's all we have. We can't create data. We can't update data. It's not our data service. But starting next week, we're going to create our own services that allow us to do everything we want because we own the code, right? We own the database. We can do whatever we want, right? But this is a very simple service that I will implement here. So it'll live in its own IFI, right? And we're going to grab that module, the movie app module, right? And we're going to create a service using a factory. So factories allow you to create singletons, right? Single instance objects that can be then shared across the, right? You can name them, you can give them names, and then once you give them names, they can be injected, right, by name into other parts of the infrastructure, such as controllers. Controllers can ask for this service by name, just like they can ask for $scope, just like they can ask for $HTTP, $location. All those are services that were written by the authors of the framework. Yes, they all start with $, right? Ours is not going to be part of the framework. I mean, we're writing it, right? So let's create. We'll call it OMDB service, and we're going to implement it in a function also called OMDB service. Right, and it's going to encapsulate those two finders or those two read operations. It's going to create a nice API as a map, right? And it's going to create two functions, right? Find movies by title, implemented in a function of the same name, and then API equal, and then find movie single by IMDb ID. Okay, and we're going to return the API right away. So I'm following John Pappas' style, right, where we declare the API at the top, yes, and then we implement the actual functions down below. Right, so please follow that style. Right, so we're going to implement function find movie by title, and then find movie by IMDb. Okay, so in here is where we're going to put our HTTP. Right, we're going to put the HTTP in there. We're going to copy from here, and we're going to move it into. So this is find. What is this? Search. This is search controller, right? So this is searching by title. So I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to paste it in here. It's going to use this URL. So use the title as an argument. There it is, right? And then it's going to notify this render function. See that? But I don't have a render function here. I don't have a render function here. Where's the render function? Back in the controller, right? Back in the controller. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use this, since I don't have a render function here, instead, you're going to pass me as an argument a function, which I will call when the response comes back. Right? So you're going to pass me a callback function, and that's the callback function I will call when the response comes back. Make sense? Right? So let's see if this works. Let's we have this in OMDB service. Let's include it in our index page. Let's include it, right? And we'll say script source service C, and we have the OMDB service. Right? Obviously, we need to rewrite the controller here. The controller is no longer going to use the $HTTP. It's going to use this new service we just wrote, right? So let's use that service we just wrote. So instead of this, we're going to ask for this brand new service. We're no longer going to use HTTP, so I'm going to erase that. That's bad practice, right? Instead, we're going to ask for this service we just wrote, OMDB service. Notice that it's being injected just like all the other services are being injected, right? But where these other services were written by the Angular team, right? We wrote our own. We wrote our own service. It can be injected just like the others. Now that I have this service, I can invoke them. I'm going to say OMDB service. No, what is it? Find. What was it? Find movie by title, right? And we need to pass the title as an argument, and we need to pass the function, the callback function, as an argument too, for render. Right? So let's see if this works or it blows up in our face. It didn't work. Let's see what's going on. HTTP is not defined. HTTP is not defined. Where? In OMDB service. Oh, we never defined it in the service, right? In the service, let's go back to the service. It's using HTTP here, right? But I never defined it here. You know, like any service, it can be injected, right? Anywhere where you need it by name. Right, so let's try again. A response. So what success is going to call that function. When it calls the function, it passes a response. Yep. So refresh. So it looks like it worked, right? And we can search things, avatar. Okay. Right, so it works, right? So let's refactor now the other one, right? Which one? Where else did we use it? In the details, right? So let's go fix that, details. So we're going to remove this. So copy. I'm going to put that where? In find movie by ID. And here's the IMDb that's coming as an argument. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here, replace it right here as an argument. And the function that you want me to call, you're going to pass it to me as an argument, as a callback. Right, and I will use that. I will call that callback whenever I'm done. So now that I'm not using the HTTP, I'm going to inject my OMDB service, right? And I'm going to say OMDB service dot find movie by IMDb. All right, I'm going to pass it as argument the IMDb that comes from the parameter, and I'm going to pass it also the function that I want you to notify when you get the response. For a lot of us that you know, we're Java developers, C# developers, this syntax might be a little disconcerting, right? The passing functions around, right? And they're treated just like any other variable, right? That's a very, very powerful okay, that you can treat functions just like any other variable. You can pass it, right, and somebody will use it, and they can be anonymous, right? They can be they can be embedded right there. It's a very, very powerful syntax, right? So render, here's the function that's going to be invoked. So let's refresh. Right, so if I go to Titanic, the details page works as well. Yes.
Are these promises?
Yes, they're promises, and we'll do promises next week.
Oh, there's a little bit of a subtlety difference.
Yeah, there's a little different, right? So promises, you can have error handling. You can do all sorts of things with thens and whatnot. You're going to use a cube library, which we'll introduce, I think, next week. We'll use a cube promise library. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? Yeah. And to your point, when we use promises, we won't be passing callbacks anymore. It will remove the need to pass a callback, which is somewhat of a, passing a callback is it kind of gives away the fact that you're using an asynchronous API, right? And that these two are separate processes that don't talk to that talk to each other asynchronously. APIs really should only expect the data that it needs. It should not have to know how you want to be notified or anything like that. Right? That's another concern, right? And promises allows you to separate these two concerns of the API, and then how do you want to be notified. Those are two different concerns. Right now they're married. The data you want to pass me, and also how you want to be notified, right? So yeah, so this is a that dot dash comma render. It says you're using HTTP, and HTTP has these problems, and the browser has these limitations, and that's why using these callbacks, right? That's another issue, and we'll talk about it when we look at promises next week. All right, everyone still with me? All right, awesome. All right, so there was one topic that we didn't get to cover on Tuesday that I'd like to cover now, which are directives. Okay, let's talk about directives. And so notice that we haven't used jQuery for anything just yet. See that? Right? We're using Angular's templating engine to dynamically generate the DOM. Right? I mean, underneath, even though we're not writing any code that deliberately manipulates DOM, under the covers, obviously there is DOM manipulation, right? Okay, and we know how to manipulate the DOM, right? We wrote jQuery a couple of weeks ago, right? We were playing around and we saw that we had full control over the DOM. Yes, right? But even though they're both technologies manipulate the DOM, they don't play nice with one another, right? Well, not in the sense that you might expect. Okay, if you have Angular dynamically rendering table rows and such, right? You should not use jQuery to then all of a sudden start also to manipulate the same DOM that the controller is responsible for. Okay, they're going to fight against each other, right? Because one of them manipulates the DOM at a very object-oriented level, right? It has this model, and this model is somehow mapped to some templates, and templates render the DOM, right? So it has a lot of layers of abstraction, right? Whereas jQuery is more down to earth, right? It's like it can directly manipulate the DOM, right? And if an AngularJS generates a DOM and it expects that DOM to be of a particular format, if all of a sudden you use jQuery and start mocking with that DOM, right? You create now what Angular thinks the DOM is not really what the DOM is, right? So now there has to be a synchronicity of what the model is and what the DOM is, right? And Angular always expects these to be, very, very in sync with one another. If somebody comes around and starts mocking with the DOM but not updating the model, right? Now these two are not a one-to-one mapping, right? And Angular gets very upset if that happens. So there is a correct way of incorporating jQuery into Angular, right? And that's through the use of directives. Okay, so let's talk about directives. Okay, so directives. I mean, we've been using directives already. Okay, we've been using directives all along. All these ng view, ng controller, ng whatever, right? All these are directives. Okay, they're all implemented using Angular directives. Directives allow Angular to take over entire HTML elements, redefine their behavior, define new attributes on elements, right? Define new classes, just take over your entire page. Now, to create a directive, we use the function directive. Just like to declare a controller, we say .controller. We can create new directives using .directive. Right? With a directive, you can create, if you don't like the HTML language, you can create your own language. You can create your own HTML elements, right? You can have HTML do everything you ever wished, right? And they will behave exactly the way you redefine them. Okay, they're very, very powerful. So let's create the very simplest of directives. Let's just create a directive that just says hello. Just says hello world, right? The hello world directive. Okay, it's a brand new element that did not exist. We're creating it. There it is. Pointy bracket hello dash world. That's definitely not an HTML element. Okay, we created it from scratch. So let's see how we do this. Okay. So what we're going to do is create. Wait a minute. See. So this is the main application. Right? This is the main application. This is the index page. And notice that in the HTML, we have this hello world tag. You see that? And this hello world tag, the only thing that it does is that it renders like this, hello world. There it is. So those two words were rendered by this tag that I defined. Okay? So let's see how we do that. Right? So to do that, first we implement a app.js. There it is. It's just an Angular module with a hello world directive. That's the name. Never mind these other dependencies. These dependencies that you see here are my own directives that I use to implement these code elements here. These code elements that you can collapse, right? That you can expand. Those are my own directives, right? And we'll take a look at them later on, right? So, but I created my own elements to allow me to do that. All right. Okay, so there it is. So that's my right now I'm just declaring my hello world directive application, right? Which I declared where? I declared it. There it is. Hello world directive. There it is. My ng app. Okay. So the actual implementation of my hello world directive is in this hello world.js. Let's see how we implement it. Right, to implement it, we grab a hold of the module, like we always do, right? We grab a hold of the existing module, and then we say, I want to create a brand new directive whose name is hello world, and it's implemented in this function hello world down here, very much like a controller, right? Okay. Now, this naming here, the name that I chose here, hello, capital W, world, right? That has a naming convention, right? The naming convention is that it's camel-cased, right, with a lowercase, starting with a lowercase, and it's camel-cased, and that maps to HTML. Okay? So in JavaScript, the naming convention is camel-cased, meaning each word is capitalized, except the first one. But that maps in HTML with each word lowercase, but each word starting with a dash in front of it. You see that? So that name, hello world with capital W, maps to this hello world with lowercase w and dash, right? Yes?
When you say maps, did you have to define hello world somewhere, or does it?
We defined it right here. Oops. We defined it right here, this hello world.
So it'll put in the,
Yeah, there's a rule, there's a couple, like 10 rules on how it maps names declared by a directive and maps them to HTML ASCII. Right? So it looks at the HTML hello dash world, says, so I'm looking for something that has naming as hello capital W or V. Okay? So there's a couple of rules on how it searches for these names. Okay? The easiest thing to remember is that if you follow the camel case, when you name them, it maps to the same words but with dashes in between. That's the easiest way to remember it. Okay? But in the documentation, AngularJS directives, it shows what the naming convention is. Matching directives, so it normalizes. So it's strips all the dashes, the underscores and whatnot, and it maps them. There's different naming conventions. You can use dashes, colons, underscore. Wait a minute. Yeah, camel case, right? It's the process of converting the camel case to the HTML is called normalization. Right? It normalizes the names, right? Using camel case, and then it maps to dashes. Okay? So you can read through this camel casing rules. All right. And so what does it do? What am I doing here? Hello world. There it is. So it's implemented in this function. It's implemented in that function. It becomes a singleton, a single instance of that tag, and we're doing the simplest of things. The simplest of things is to return an object, a JSON object that configures the behavior of this directive. Right? We're returning a JSON object that says this hello world should use, as a template, it should use this static text. Right? So this, but we mean template here is that this doesn't have to be static text. It could have Angular expressions in here, right? It could have curly brackets. It could have all sorts of things. It could have ng repeats. It could be very sophisticated, right? It could be very sophisticated HTML, right? And with all the rules of Angular that we've seen so far, right? All the ng repeats, all the ng, everything that it's parsed. It's parsed into into HTML. But here we're doing something simple. Our template is very trivial. We're only going to use we're going to use this piece of text, and wherever that tag hello-world appears, it will be replaced with whatever the template says. Right now, the template is very trivial and it has these words, but it could be something fairly complex that has ng repeats and models and input fields and controllers and all sorts of things. Right now, it's just these trivial words. Everybody okay? Right? That means that anywhere where the tags hello world is, it will be replaced with whatever the template says. The template right now is those two words. Everybody okay? One limitation, you have to close the tag. Right? Version 1 of Angular does not support tags that don't, the self-closing tags. Because in HTML, this, right? If you don't have any body, if you don't have anything in between the two tags, right? It's equivalent to writing this. Yes, it's equivalent to doing that. AngularJS does not support that just yet. Right, so you have to close it, even if you don't have anything inside. Okay? All right. Everybody understood this? Very simple, right? Very, very simple. So I created a trivial tag. let's go on to the next one. So let's go on to template URL. Okay. So in this example, our template, instead of saying just hello world, is an entire table with lots of data inside of that table. Obviously, I'm not going to put it in a single line of text. Right? Instead, I could point to a file that has my content. You see that? Right? So in this example, the text, the table lives in a HTML file, jgatable.html. See that? Okay. And notice that it's all static. It doesn't have any dynamic content. Right? It's all static HTML. See that? Again, I'm keeping it simple, just static HTML. And then I create a directive. I think up here. There it is. I grab in jgatable.js, I create a new directive called jgatable. That's the module name. The module is called jgatable. And I create a new directive and then implement it in this function. And in the template, instead of providing text, if you instead use, instead of saying template and a string, instead if you say template URL and then provide the name of the file, it will replace wherever it sees JGA template, JGA table, it will replace with whatever that HTML element is. It's almost like an include, right? It's almost like an include, but you're including with your own elements, right? You're creating your own elements, right? So in the HTML, if you do the page source, right? Notice that we're saying JGA table. There it is. That's all there is. JGA table. So that tag is replaced by that table. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. Let's go a little further. Attributes. Okay. So in this case, my JGA table now, I can pass it attributes like you would expect, right? Any decent HTML element has attributes, and you can configure the behavior of your tag. Yes. So I created two attributes. One as a title of the table that will appear above the table, and the other one a border that I want around my table. You see that? So I can configure my attribute. I can configure my tag. And the way it renders is, there it is, that's the title, right? That's the title that I pass as an argument. And the border 5 is used to create this border all around the table. You see that? And so how do we do that? Right? So to do that, we can look at the implementation of the JGA table. Right? So here's the implementation. The implementation is in the same function which we had earlier. In the previous example, we just had template URL. See that? We had template URL. Now, the way we grab things from the attributes, right? The attributes in that tag is basically creates variables, right? It creates variables. One of the variables is the caption. The other one is the border. We can declare local variables. We can create local variables and map them. We can map them to attributes that are declared in the element. We can say that, well, I want to create a local variable called caption that grabs the value from an attribute of the same name. Right? Notice that, right? We have the attributes are caption and border. Caption and border. So what this says is that I want to create a local scope, meaning a bag of variables, local variables, where it grabs a caption from an attribute called caption and a border that has the same name. If it has the same name, then you can just use equals. So it's also called border. So that you don't have to type border again. If they're the same, the variable name is the same as the scope variable, then you don't need to type the name of the attribute. Here I did just to tell you that Right? You can rename them here. You can give them other names. If they're not the same name, then you have to provide the name of the attribute. Yes? Now that I have these variables local to the implementation of my table, these variables are now available in the view. They're now available in the view. If we look at the HTML, the HTML, I think it's, what is it, JGA cable HTML. There it is. If I look at the source, okay, notice that I used caption variable declared in the scope, right? And I put it inside my H2. See that? And then I use the variable border to configure the border of the table. See that? So this is a way that the outside world can talk to my brand new element through attributes. Yes? And it's talking to it using these attributes. Notice that I'm using here quotes instead of JGA table. You see that those quotes? Otherwise, it would think it's it's some variable, right, in the Angular scope, right, created by some controller. But here I'm saying this is a literal string JGA table. But what if I want to be a little more sophisticated and the data is actually dynamic data? Maybe from some array provided by some database, right, or some movies that are coming out from some remote API. Well, let's see. Here's an example. Here's an example where we're going to create a controller, an outside controller, that is going to provide data to this page, to this particular page. And the data that it provides is this array, an array of users, right? Alice, Bob, Molly. Okay. Then it's going to provide that data to my JGA table through one of the attributes, right? But instead of these attributes being hard-coded borders and titles, instead it's going to pass a variable that contains an array of objects. Okay, and inside, right, I can use this data to do an ng repeat, right, and display the content as I pass it in there. So now my JGA table is going to grab, right? It's going to grab the caption from my caption attribute. It's going to grab the border from the border attribute, but it's also going to grab data from the outside world, right? From an attribute also called data, and the controller is going to provide it. Let's see how the controller does that. So the controller, do I have the controller here? I don't have the controller. Let's look at the source code for this. Oh, I have 2 more minutes, right? Yeah. So here's the controller, right? Here's my Angular. Here's my data controller, right? Called data controller, and it's declaring the users array, and then making it available to the page through the users variable. See that? Right? My page. So here's the declaration of the app. Here's the declaration of my data control. There it is. And the data controller is making available the users array in the page. So, and it's displaying it here. See that? It's displaying it right here. That's how this is the render, right? We're rendering the array right here from the JSON, right? And then the JGA table, we're passing the caption. We're not passing the border, I guess. We're not passing border. And here's where we're passing the users. Here's the users array that is declared by the controller, right? And the controller is then passed to the JGA table for rendering, right? So here's my JGA, right? Oh no, that's the controller. Sorry. The source, the JGA table is just taking that data and adding it to the scope, so that now my JGA table HTML, right, is going to use that for rendering a dynamic table. Right, there it is, right? We have our table, we have our caption, and it uses the data scope variable, right? It's going to iterate over that array and display the first, last, and email of the object that was passed by the controller. You see that? All right, very, very nice. Very, very powerful. As we'll see when we meet next week, as we see, we'll see that just like controllers can use services, just like controllers can use services, and declaring them here in the constructor of the controller. Well, directives can do the same thing. They can ask for services to be injected, and then from within, they can use the services to ask for data, right? To retrieve data dynamically. We'll see that next week. All right, let's leave it here. I have office hours. If you want to come and chat.